Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We shall just wait while people join before we get started. I can still see we've got a few people joining, so I'll just wait another minute or so before we get started, if that's okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to this final webinar of our Networks for Nature series. The series is being hosted by White Peak Farmers and funding through the Southwest Peak Landscape Partnership with funding through the National Heritage Lottery Fund. My name's Anne Cantrell. I'm a facilitator for two groups up in the Peak District where I work with some absolutely fantastic people. And this series has been really born out of my group, the White Peak Farmers. So, you know, I need to thank those people and for pulling this together and helping me pull this whole series together. So this is our final one where we're hoping to look at the facilitation groups as a whole and think about the future. So through the past few months, the series, we've looked at some of the examples of the facilitation groups. We've showcased the work that they've done, some of the fantastic stuff that's been happening through the groups. We've discussed a variety of topics and different issues that affect farming and the environment, from food to carbon credits, biodiversity offsetting, reversing wildlife declines, and looking to how we pay for public goods and reversing some of those declines. But the thread of those webinars has been about the importance of collaboration, and facilitation groups are all about collaboration. And as I mentioned, today we're looking to the future. We want to build and improve on the facilitation and collaboration approach to look to that greener future. So I'm really delighted today that we've got a fantastic panel of people, all have agreed to come back and share their knowledge and thoughts with us today. Our aim is to put questions to our panelists and to stimulate ideas and discussion. So please post any comments that you've got in the chat box and any questions in the Q&A. If you can like the questions as we go along, that will help us to pick out some most popular questions. We'll try and answer some of those questions as we go along, but it will be great to try and pick out some of your questions to put to our panel today. So as I say, we've got this fantastic group of people here, our panelists. We've got three different facilitators with us today. Caroline Hanks, if you want to wave at everybody when I announce you. Caroline Hanks is a freelance farm environment advisor. She's the facilitator for Herefordshire Meadows, where there's a group of 63 farmers and landowners across Herefordshire who are managing and restoring diverse swards for future farming systems, benefiting soils, livestock and human health. So I think Caroline's mentioned this before, but one of their major successes, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that today, is about bringing in different funding from a range of sources. And that's something that hopefully we'll expand on today. We've also got Chloe Palmer, who's a farm environment advisor based in the Peak District. She's got a wealth of experience, over 20 years experience in providing advice to farmers, previously working from the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. She's now got 3 facilitation groups up near the Peak District: Hope Valley Farmers, Bradfield Farmers, and the Peak District Estates Group. She's also the catchment advisor for the Little Don Natural Flood Management Project in Sheffield, and to top it off, a freelance agricultural journalist writing for the Farmer's Guardian, Dairy Farmer, and Arable Farming magazines. Next, we've got Jenny Phelps Mbe, so Senior Conservation Advisor for the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group in Gloucestershire. She's also a member of DEFRA's Environmental Land Management Scheme Engagement Group, a trustee for the Foundation for Common Land. She also leads her team on many farmer-led projects, including Facilitator on the Farmer Guardians of the Upper Thames Facilitation Fund, and she has co-developed the integrated local delivery framework to achieve multi-objective environmental delivery. So those are our facilitators. And then we've got a brilliant group again from DEFRA. We've got Ellen Brown and Sarah Blatchford. Ellen is the head of policy for local nature recovery at DEFRA. She covers spatial prioritisation, local governance and collaboration. And Sarah is the Facilitation Fund account manager for the Future Farming and Countryside Programme Directorate. Last but not least is Brian Mcdonald, who has been a senior advisor at Natural England for some time. He's now being seconded to DEFRA to work in the development of the Landscape Recovery Programme. Brian's background includes managing the nature improvement areas and, of course, setting up the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund along with DEFRA, where he's been successful in creating over 130 groups with over 3,600 members as part of those groups. So welcome to our panelists. Hopefully they'll give you some fantastic discussion today. And before we start our questions, I'd just like to play a short video that's been provided to us from the chair of Natural England, Tony Juniper. So Liz, if you could just play that for us, please.
During recent years, it's become increasingly apparent that we face twin global crises seen in the form of rapid climate change and the loss of biological diversity and attendant ecosystem degradation. It's also become very apparent that for both of these crises, it is very much down to how we manage the land in terms of how we find solutions, both to catch carbon in ecosystems and also to preserve and recreate the habitats for either declining or fast disappearing animals and plants. If we're going to do that in a country like England and to harness the land for these twin purposes of climate change mitigation and adaptation on the one side and the recovery of nature on the other, then it's very much in farmed landscapes where we need to act, considering how about 70% of our country is in different kinds of agricultural management. We know that we can turn around these trends through careful action based upon the kind of support that's been there now for some years through things like countryside stewardship. But if we're going to do this in an effective way and to really change the fortunes of animals and plants that were so much loved once in our countryside, then we're going to need to act at scale. It's brilliant that so many individual farmers have been coming forward with their own plans to be able to reverse this decline, but it's going to be so much more effective if we can act at the scale of entire landscape, joining together the efforts of different farmers to create a far bigger collective outcome than would have been the case with everyone working on their own. And this is the whole point of the Facilitation Fund, helping to support countryside stewardship schemes in ways whereby we can get that landscape impact. And indeed, across England now, there are about 136 such initiatives at that broader scale, with about 4,000 different farmers, landowners and land managers involved. And we've already seen the benefits that can come with this for our beleaguered animals and plants, and into the future, hopefully we can do much more of it, because we know from tests and trials that have been taking place that in fact this does deliver the kinds of outcomes that we seek. So I do encourage everybody to think about ways in which they might wish to contribute to this bigger scale action through being the Facilitation Fund, and to lay the foundations for nature's recovery across our country. Because we know that food, although vital, it's not the only thing that we need to get from our land, and indeed the more we restore nature, the more longer term we also ensure our food security.
Okay. Thanks, Liz. So that was a nice introduction from Tony, just talking really about what we need to do to turn things around and get nature back into England, which is what we're all about. And we're all about trying to support farmers to do that. Now, what I'd hope we can do through this last webinar is to just focus on some of the themes that are important to facilitation groups, and to think about how we build on what we've achieved so far. And what I want to sort of do is look at the role of the facilitator and the advice that they provide. So I want to just put to the panel, we all know that farmers really want information about their own farms and what it is that they've got, because then they can start to think about what things they can do, how they can change their management, or what they can do to support a particular species. So I just wanted to sort of explore what you think about how important the role is that the facilitators have, and what and the advice that they provide. If I come to the facilitators first, because obviously you're at the heart of providing this advice, and from your experience, because you've got vast experience, how important do you think your role as a facilitator is, and that advice that you provide? Chloe, I don't know if you want to be first up to answer.
Yeah, happy to start that off. I think the advice we give is crucial. I mean, obviously, one of the big barriers we've had to date is that one-to-one advice to farmers isn't funded through the Facilitation Fund. So whilst you can provide advice at events where you might be on somebody's farm specifically, anything where you're actually operating in a one-to-one capacity, you're either charging the farmer for or doing it for free effectively, and certainly if you're an independent advisor. So that has been limiting to date, but we've been hearing positive noises from DEFRA that might change with the next round of facilitation funding. I think the role of advice is crucial, and I think the role of one-to-one advice is crucial, particularly in the uplands. I mean, I guess I would say that, but in my groups, I've got a number of hard to reach, as they are labelled. I don't particularly like that label, but it's what people like to talk about. Farmers who perhaps haven't engaged with other initiatives in the past, who don't necessarily use technology to look at webinars. So really, their only way of actually getting information about what they can do from an environmental perspective or a grant funding perspective is to speak to somebody, to an advisor. Very often they wouldn't necessarily want to speak to someone from a government agency or a national park. They don't see them as independent. So somebody like a facilitator plays a crucial role. And I found certainly with quite a number of the members of my group, I've got farmers who've never really done anything environmental. Perhaps they did ELS several years ago. Many of them haven't even done that. And through the Facilitation Fund, we're slowly getting them to start thinking about it. In fact, this morning I was out on farm with one of my Hope Valley farmers who over the period of my Facilitation Fund has done more and more and more. And today we were starting to talk to them about a major woodland scheme, which will be really, really exciting, and it's going to happen. And I'm not sure without the Facilitation Fund whether that would have ever happened. So I think it's hugely important, and I think particularly in areas where you've got farmers who perhaps wouldn't, as I say, go to events, the Natural England events or NFU events or things like that. If we're going to be moving into a period that's going to be hugely challenging for these small family farms, which is what the majority of my members are, certainly in Hope Valley farmers and Bradfield farmers, we need to be able to talk to them about the environmental opportunities and the alternatives, because otherwise I do fear that either potentially they may end up going out of business and their land will be either taken on or bought out by bigger farms, or, you know, they may go down the intensification route, and either way out up, I think, you know, the environment will be the thing to lose out. So I think getting that advice, because a lot of farmers, they don't realize the value of some of the habitats they've got. You know, they know they've got a bit of old grassland, but I've been onto farms, you know, just this summer where I've walked onto meadows and they're absolutely fantastic. And nobody's ever told the farmer that. They're possibly on a targeting map sometime, but nobody's had that conversation with them to tell them what a wonderful asset they've got and how important it is, both locally and regionally. So, yeah, I think it's crucial. I'll shut up now.
Okay, thanks, Lily. Caroline, if I come to you, do you think, particularly with what you're doing around meadows, that it's done and dusted, isn't it? The advice around meadows, we don't really need to do it. We know what we need to do in terms of restoring it. So is that advice outdated, or is there a future for the sort of advice that you provide? You know, are there things that are, how do you make it future-proof, the advice that you give?
That's a really interesting question. So I think what we try and do is to make it specific, if you like, to the farm that we're dealing with, because there's lots of written down about meadow restoration and in lots of different places, but every farm is different, every field is different. So that's what we're really doing, is helping people to tailor the advice to what they really need. Often meadow restoration can be very poorly served. Actually, it's very poorly served in the actual restoration side of it in the current mid-tier of the stewardship scheme. So we are looking for funding for elsewhere, and so if we don't know exactly So it's just about tailoring it, and also putting people in touch with other people in their area. That's really what we do a lot with our group. We are scattered around the county, as you said. We're not a contiguous group of farmers, so we're very much encouraging people. So if we come across farmers like Chloe mentioned, who don't know how fabulous their grassland is, then we can find somebody who can come and really enthuse them about it. They want to learn more and that kind of thing, and help them get grants for managing that. But most importantly, also then putting people in touch with someone else just down the road who might have the equipment, the kit that they haven't got. So that our future proofing is looking at making the most of the skill set in people's minds and what they know about meadow restoration, but also the availability of machinery and then seed sources. Because for a lot, if we're going to have this great an increase in the habitat restoration and connecting habitats up, that we want to be using really local provenance seed. So our main effort in future proofing is putting people in touch with neighbours with that and in confidence, so that they can share seed, they can share machinery, they can share their skills. And we find then actually the role of the facilitator is just to catalyse that action, get it started, and then often we can step away and things will just happen because people are sharing ideas and learning from each other independently as little subclusters within our county. And I think that's a really great thing for the future.
And Jenny, that peer-to-peer learning is really critical, isn't it, to what we do as facilitators? It's really critical to get change within the landscape, and for certain aspects of the environment, that advice, we're always learning. Everybody's always learning. Do you find that with what you're doing, the work that you do? Because, you know, you're advocating some of the integrated delivery. How do we as facilitators get some of these messages across? Because there's an awful lot going on in the environment. How do we effectively send our messages out there?
Thanks very much, Anne. I mean, I think from a perspective of learning, that from running the facilitation funds for about 5 years now, we've got 4 in Gloucestershire, that exactly as you say, it's about trying to translate for farmers this complex multiple opportunities of their land and what people want them to do. So we find the role of facilitator is essential in that. So what we do is when we go to each farm, we see how we can be helpful to the person. You know, how are they coping with transition? What are the impacts for them as a family and their business? And then we contextualize their farm within the catchment, within the landscape, and within the other group of farmers, to actually look at that against all the different spatial prioritization that's been there. So we do a simple scoping exercise initially of, you know, through Magic or through Catchment Data Explorer, And then we can connect them, as you know, to all the other farmers within those water bodies and listen and learn. So we're piecing together this sort of socio-economic and environmental opportunity to come together to build resilience. And that's really about sharing information and learning and actually joining those connections, a bit like Caroline was alluding to. It's about sharing resources and knowledge and peer-to-peer learning, and actually where you start to piece things together as a facilitator across that landscape. And obviously farmers are very happy to share and learn with each other. I think the thing that really came out of it for me is the fact that when we started this a long time ago, when you go onto a farm, you know, quite often the farmer will assume, if they haven't seen a species for a while, that it will be somewhere else. So for example, we had this thing with curlew, where we had farmers along the Thames who had all grown up with curlew. And when we met the whole group of them along the water body, we were able to tell them that there aren't any curlew anywhere. In fact, there was one curlew left. And that created this enormous desire for the farmers, to help restore the curlews across the landscape. So I think the facilitators play an enormous role in that information transfer about enabling action, but also signposting to all of the funding, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute. I mean, we connect directly to the catchment-based approach partnerships, which we also lead on. We feel that that's a really good way for farmers to understand, you know, who are all the people that want to invest in their land. We group our farmers along groups of groups of parishes along water bodies, because we feel we can't manage soil, which is essential for ecological recovery and delivering public goods without managing water. And we invite that real involvement about what are the issues with infrastructure, what infrastructure do we need, how can we restore green infrastructure, how we can connect habitats and build soil and water across those landscapes, and how we can relocalise food supplies and maximise the opportunities for business resilience within that context. So without the facilitator, none of that happens. Quite often farmer groups are setting up at the moment and they sort of stand there, go, well, what happens next? You know, actually it's because you need somebody who is, as I think you said, Caroline, or maybe it was Chloe, that sort of trusted independent person who's just there to bring it all together, but to connect them with those opportunities which can be complex around the multiple investors and the multiple funding streams that might deliver actions on their farm. So as a rule, we're just there to say, what would you like to do? And we'll help facilitate that from partnerships or local nature partnerships about how that investment can take place. And specifically, what has been really successful is the release of volunteers, the hundreds of volunteers that have gone out on farms to help plant hedges and, you know, restore ponds and all of that sort of stuff. So the facilitator role is absolutely crucial in signposting to other experts, other farm support advisors, but to be that sort of trusted, friendly generalist that actually makes all this stuff happen and creates that magic across those landscapes and catchments. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. That's really interesting. I come to Ellen and Sarah, if I may, together. I mean, DEFRA recognise the role of the facilitator and their importance to a certain extent. Can you just explain to us, going forward, we have the facilitation fund. There's just been a new round announced. How do you see it being taken forward? And how much do you really value that role? And thinking about, again, advice and how that will work in the future.
Shall I start off, Sarah?
Go on then.
Thank you. So absolutely, we think, well, we've had so much evidence, both from the facilitation rounds and also our tests and trials, of just how valuable facilitators are, not just in kind of the environmental outcomes that you ultimately see from people who are supported by those funds in their agreements, but also in that building of communities and knowledge sharing, which Chloe and Jenny have spoken about, which is so important, particularly as we're going through a transition. So in terms of how that will be reflected in future schemes, that's absolutely something that we're looking to build on. So we will be saying more later this year about our proposals for the future, but we really recognise that when you're looking to achieve environmental outcomes, particularly when you're thinking about the schemes around local nature recovery and landscape recovery, so where we're looking at more complex actions or delivering things where you might require that degree of coordination, facilitation is a really great place to start. So we're definitely hoping to learn from and build on those models and make sure there's continuity for all the great work that's been done so far.
And from a So I work in countryside stewardship. I work in the current schemes, and I would say that there's been a growing realisation in DEFRA of the importance of facilitators and facilitation fund. It's when we started talking about environmental land management, that was one of the key things that was promoted, was that we wanted more collaboration because we can see the value of it. And I think possibly Ellen would agree, it's been recognised within DEFRA now how closely our particular two teams are working together on collaboration. That's been a bit of a trailblazer, I think, between countryside stewardship and the new schemes, because we see that value of collaboration for the facilitators, but we're also trying to replicate it in our own teams now and bring that working together to, we want to create a scheme where people can be in facilitation and then move into a new collaboration offer without there being any sort of difficulties or tensions in those two offers. So there was an announcement on Monday of a new round of facilitation fund that will run till 2025. And our intention is that you will be able to be in any or no scheme. So you can continue in environmental stewardship and EU schemes. You can have a countryside stewardship domestic agreement, or you can have no agreement at all and you can wait and move into one of the environmental land management schemes. We want this to be as fluid and easy journey as possible for our customers and our facilitators, because we do want to encourage and continue to support that collaboration that we see on the ground at the moment.
That's really good to hear. You know, I think we really welcome that sort of information and that approach. Brian, if I just might come to you very quickly on sort of final thing around advice. What do you think from the sort of research that you've done, the monitoring and evaluation work that you've carried out? Are there skills that are lacking within the current facilitation groups? How can we, you know, should we just be focused on countryside stewardship, or should we be looking to deliver advice around other themes or other areas? What's your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Hello, everybody. Yeah, the you know, being able to sort of capture all those skills and sort of experiences in one person might be a hard task. But actually, what I've seen from the what we started back in 2015 with the initial sort of 19 groups that were set up then through to where we are now is that role of the if like the trusted local advisor is really well sort of informed. And as I say, the challenge is, do we have those skill sets that are required to enable all this in one person or in one place? And actually we don't. So we need to be able to recognize that there's some critical aspects of what our facilitator needs to do, the competency they've got, but equally being able to allow them the resource to secure advice and input from others that might not be, they might be within their area or within this sort of area that they want to look into further. So it is really important to have that opportunity. But I think one of the points of essence is that the local trusted advisor is the critical component. And around all that, other things can flow. So there's a number of observations and sort of experiences that come through the monitoring and the experience with the groups we've set up over the last 5 or 6 years. And well, what is apparent is that while we are, the big ambition is how do we upskill the farming community and land management community to be able to take on board these things themselves. So the peer-to-peer aspect of what we're doing is really important. So being able to enable that is critical. But equally, a facilitator has to be a leader, a pivot, a coordinator, or an expert area in certain subject matters to be able to do what you do. And it's quite, as I say, remarkable to be able to get all those skills in one place, which I think gives us a challenge. So, if we are serious about collaboration, are we providing if you like, the entry point for people who might wish to pursue a career in advice provision? Are the research and academic institutions, supporting this type of approach and stepping up to provide the routes to that success? So, as I say, it is fascinating just what we've learned to date. But as I say, the critical thing is that it appears to work. we get better value in terms of countryside stewardship, option deployment, or agri-environments at detail. And the well-being effects of what you do and what you enable is all captured, but it's very, very powerful. One thing that I would say, and it might be reflecting equally the panel, is that what I've noticed as well is that the majority of the facilities we have are women. So there might be something in there also about gender-based skills and who's best to make things work successfully collaboratively.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, that's really interesting. And we do have a high number of females on the panel today, which is brilliant. If I can stick with you, Brian, I want to move on now to really think about the facilitation group and the model and what a facilitation group looks like. And again, thinking about the work that you've done on evaluating the groups, does there appear to be a model that works? A group number that's more effective? Is it dependent on the priorities of the area? What do you think is working best?
Yeah, it's good, and I'm really pleased that I've got the monitoring and evaluation published finally to be able to substantiate what I might say. But equally, there's a lot of stuff in there that helps to point to how to and the experiences to date. But when this was set up, we recognised there was a sort of range of different types of approaches that could be welcome in this type of ambition, from the very small scale, sort of 4 farmers getting together to do things at that level, up to bigger groups, in some cases of over 80, 90 farmers collaborating with a body in the locality. So there's a range of options and approaches that can be used under this setup. But the critical thing comes down to the ambition. So if you have a group of farmers who have got that ambition for that larger scale, and the land and the geography supports that, then it's possible to be able to do a big group with more money and more activity to inform it. But equally, what I've seen is that at the lower level, where it is just that sort of possible informal network where they get together 3 or 4 times a year to discuss how they're going to use countryside stewardship, or where they might need a few bits of training to raise the level of what they're doing, that's equally applicable. So there's a range of experiences and approaches that can be driven by the funding that's available depending on the size and ambition of the group. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's really important we've got that range to allow people to come in and engage from different stages of that evolution. What the monitoring is saying is that we seem to be sort of getting a sort of where efficiencies and sort of aggregation and sort of averages are working out. We're seeing group sizes just under 30 appear to be very effective. So there's something there about the effectiveness of a group, and possibly some limits where that might be reached that might start to dilute the effect of the facilitation and the relationship between the facilitator and the group members, and within the group members themselves. So I suspect in a smaller group, there's probably more opportunity to watch what your neighbour's doing and check on the dialogue and the conversations that are going on. Whereas in the bigger group, it may be the case that people can get lost and can hide behind others who might be more active. They engage. But it's a really interesting area. And as I say, some of the learning is that we know that the facilitator is welcome and provides a really good pivot to make things better. But there might be sort of limits that we reach, both in terms of the effectiveness based on the minimum, as well as what might be a maximum size for success.
That's interesting. Caroline, yours is quite a different group. As you've mentioned, it's not contiguous, it's across Herefordshire. How have you found managing that group? You've got a large number of members. Have you been able to be effective in your sort of working? I mean, obviously you have, and it's been a great success, but I just want to sort of get your thoughts and experience on doing that, because it's quite a different model and setup to other groups.
Yes, thank you. It is a different model, and I am aware what Brian says, that it's possible with a larger group. It's harder to really link and stay in touch with a larger number of people. I would acknowledge that. So I'm very interested in looking at that optimum size for the future. I think the way we've worked with that is by having a very although we appear to be a single subject group on meadows, you know, we know that they bring so many huge benefits across the landscape and for so many different reasons. So we've really tried to pick people up from all different aspects that brought them into the group in the first place, if you like. And that means that when we do meet, we rarely have all 63 people. We never have had all 63 together, actually, perhaps our final end party or whatever. But so we pick out subgroups the whole time and work, people self-select to come to those. So I think we're normally at that optimum number when we do meet. So, and then we're able to engage and then because different people come to different groups, that actually causes helps a lot of the cross-fertilization, if you like, and people saying, oh, didn't, you know, encouraging people who might not have thought about meadows in their historical context or as natural flood management. You know, they then hear from other people about another aspect of what having a diverse sward can offer for the environment. So I'm not sure that answers the question, really, does it? So that's how it's happened, I guess. And as I said earlier, we've seen naturally little more local clusters developing for other reasons and around other specific funding sources that we've been able to get, so to bring people together. So I see our group actually as a whole, it's a Venn diagram of overlapping, interlocking, Jenny's nodding furiously, people who are integrated at whatever level they want to be. And we try and just keep that safe space. So in a way, because we're an interest group with the diverse swords as the binding factor, we create the safe space to discuss anything. I can see one of the questions in the Q&A or the chat is, how do you do that with such different people coming? And we just bring it back to the diverse swords each time and leave out the top and keep a clear space between that and the topics that might divide people. We're always looking for that common ground and the thread through it. And that's what kept us going, even as a large group, I think.
Jenny, I saw you nodding there, and you may want to come in on some of what Caroline was saying, but you've been extremely effective at developing partnerships throughout your career. I wonder how you see the facilitation model fitting into building up effective partnerships, because as we've said, this is not just about the facilitation groups, it is about working with other organisations and collaborating on a larger scale within the environmental and farming network. So how have you been able to do that, and how does your facilitation group sort of fit within that?
So I feel that one of the things that's sort of missing a lot of the time, and what the Facilitation Fund helps, is for farmers to be able to play their part, particularly in climate emergency. A lot of partners want to do things to farmers and the farmed environment, but actually the farmers want to help. And I think that what we try and do is represent a group of farmers in those partnerships. So the FWAG as a charity is a farmer-led charity that represents farmers that care about the environment. So our groups of farmers are really happy to be represented in that way. And just to touch on Caroline's point, I think there's two levels. There's the overarching sort of wider group that you share collective messages and has a sense of cohesion. So our Upper Thames Farmer Gardens, the Upper Thames, there's 92 farmers, and I have a monthly voice note that I do where I record an update for them and I say what we've been doing, and and then my colleagues create a lot of the webinars and things that create that shared learning. But there's a sense of partnership between those farmers, that they're in the team, because all of the projects that we're involved with, the Elms trials, all the other things, that the Soil Farm Carbon Code we're now helping to develop with a consortium, the farmers are part of that partnership. And I think that's the crucial thing that we're trying to enable them to do. Then, like Caroline, we create these smaller subgroups of farmers where your actions are much more directed and achieve much more sort of like connectivity in a smaller spatial area, and take on that local governance with the partnerships that are active in that area. So as I say, by connecting to the catchment partnerships and the local nature partnerships, we can then offer the opportunity for natural capital recovery, water and soil management, habitat creation, species connectivity, relocalisation of food supplies to the partnership for co-investment. And that's where we've been using visualisation tools, collecting GIS data, mapping data to create an environmental baseline for that co-investment. And in our Elms trial, I think we've had farmers offering to plant 60,000 hedge and tree plants that we planted last winter. So you have this idea that the farmers are going, this is what we'd love to do to help by creating that connectivity across catchments and landscapes. So it works really, really well. And we should, in my personal view, be doing this everywhere at a water body level urgently for climate change. And we need about 2,000 advisors, facilitators now to actually facilitate this opportunity. And I think that that ambition would not be, you know, sort of, I think having seen the report that came out from the Climate Change Committee's risk assessment for the state of the United Kingdom yesterday, that this is something that we should urgently be acting on, is upskilling facilitators, so there's enough of us out there to create this, this opportunity for farmers to be part of the team. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Chloe, you've got 3 groups, all reasonably close together. What do you think the opportunities are for that sort of regional collaboration, so that you've got this networking between your groups, and thinking in terms of landscape recovery, and how we can do things at a much larger scale? So we've all got our facilitation groups. Can we build up an even bigger network to do things on a larger scale?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, I think with collaboration, it's a tricky one, because I've had this discussion with partners actually about, you know, where are we seeing real collaboration? And I think it depends how you define collaboration. We've got within, say, the Hope Valley group, which is the longest established, and I think that's a key point actually, is that this kind of collaboration, it doesn't happen overnight. You know, most of the facilitation fund groups, except the very early ones, have got a 3-year time period, most of them now extended because of COVID. But even 4 years, it's a short period. So I think if we're looking at wider scale or true collaboration, we need to be looking long term. We need to be looking 5 years, absolute minimum, because it takes that long to build up those connections between members and to gain, you know, both the trust, them trusting the facilitator, but them trusting each other as well. You know, in my Hope Valley group, some of the farmers had not spoken to each other for, you know, not necessarily they'd fallen out, but, you know, they just, you know, if they didn't see each other at a market or whatever, they, you know, they didn't. So actually getting those relationships, which is it's those relationships that are key, and that doesn't happen overnight. So I think that's the first key point, is you need time. And I think as facilitators, and I don't know what, you know, how the other rest of the panel, yeah, I don't feel this is something you can force or you can engineer. It's something that you've got to sort of gently foster. And one of the ways we've done it is through some really fantastic funding we got through Severn Trent to fund a soil project. Now, but the intention of that project wasn't to get all the farmers collaborating, but in fact they did, because they shared machinery, they shared ideas, they did work for each other. You know, yes, on a loose contracting basis, but it wasn't, you know, a commercial basis. They were basically helping each other out. So it's those kind of wins that you get when you're trying to get them to do something. Moving to the next stage, which potentially is, you know, if we look at landscape recovery schemes in Elm moving forward, you know, that's quite a big ask, because that's formal collaboration, and that's potentially them signing an agreement to work alongside one another. And I'm still in my head thinking about how we're going to make that big step change, because I think that is a big step change for a lot of my members, and some of them will be willing to make it and some of them will be less willing to make it. I think it's fair. Then you go the next stage on, which is the collaboration between groups. It's quite interesting with my 3 groups, because the Hope Valley group and the Bradfield group virtually connect geographically, and they know each other really well, because, you know, the guys from Bradfield come into the valley because they use the agricultural merchants, they go to the same market, they know each other socially, perhaps through Hope Valley Young Farmers that they went 2 years ago, through shows, Hope Show, all that kind of thing. So I can see that collaboration, that's already happening. You know, we have kind of cross-fertilization because we do some joint events, and, you know, we've got one next Tuesday looking at woodland, and we've got roughly an equal split of Hope Valley members and Bradfield members, so they'll all start talking. The other group's a bit further away, and they're a slightly different group, because it's based around the two of the biggest states in the Peak District, so Haddon and Chatsworth. I'm not sure whether it might be a step too far expecting. So I think it's, you know, where you've got groups that are very similar, which my Bradfield and Hope Valley groups are, I can see that collaboration, that working together evolving anyway. But if the groups are more disparate, both physically and in terms of the type of farming, I think that will be harder. But as I say, I don't think any of us should underestimate, actually, real collaboration. It's a big challenge, I think. If anybody else is finding it easy, I'd love to know what you're doing. But, it is happening, but it's happening gradually. And I don't think it's something we can force, because then farmers will run scared of it. I think they know they're being asked to do it, and they know that Elm is going to be, something that's really going to incentivize that. And I'm just starting to think around how we're going to get them into that right frame of mind for it.
Ellen and Sarah, if I can come to you again, and if you could be brief, please, because I'm aware time is ticking on for us, and we've got so much more to discuss. Some of the things that Chloe was saying there about this inter-group collaboration, is that something that could be built on through the current facilitation fund, or through any future collaboration fund? I know we don't have anybody here from DEFRA who's focused on landscape recovery, although Brian, you're now working on it. But what do you see, Ellen, for the opportunities for the nature recovery from some of the sort of things that Chloe's been talking about there? And Sarah, you may want to add in as well, but as brief as you can, please.
So I saw one comment in the chat about sort of a forum for facilitators. So in terms of working between groups, that sounds like a really sensible idea, and we'll kind of look at that. I know there's also kind of commercial options out there in terms of, I think, is it Land Management 2.0 has a facilitators forum, there's things like that. I wasn't sure exactly if you said this, Chloe, but just in case I've got this wrong, local nature recovery is still individual agreements. So it's not that it's not group contracts. So just in case I misheard that, because I think that is occasionally a misconception that we get. So still, in the same kind of contract structure as countryside stewardship, but we're hoping to, make it a bit more user friendly. Landscape recovery is a different kettle of fish. It's it's project based. Where it's collaboration, we will look at kind of. There will need to be formal governance, so that's the case there. So in terms of where facilitation groups come in, so in terms of landscape recovery, I think there's a really good chance that facilitated groups could form almost the seed kernel, I suppose, for landscape recovery projects, both potentially through the pilots that are happening over the next few years, but into the future. Because of course, the starting point for any group project is building those relationships, as you've all talked about. So I think there's real potential there. In terms of local nature recovery, again, this is, we've talked about kind of the transition from current agreements through to new ones. We know that there's a lot of challenges and frustrations out there with people wanting to be more ambitious in their agreements and grow those. So I think there's a real opportunity for people to explore that through facilitated groups, and to be able to start to hopefully link up, not formally, but coordinating agreements to deliver, against a particular local environmental circumstances, noting what Tony Juniper said in the video about, facing joint nature and climate crises. So I think there's an awful lot of opportunity there to use these groups as sort of sources for information, but also hopefully coordinating activity. And there will be those opportunities, not just for people in local nature recovery and landscape recovery, but in the sustainable farming incentive as well, from a learning perspective. Because as I've said, we really see those groups as opportunities for learning from each other.
And
So,
from the, from the as is position, I know there are facilitators on this call who've been in the Facilitation Fund for a number of years, and may appreciate how difficult it is for us to deliver change in the current scheme. That's partly being DEFRA recognising that environmental land management is our future. So while we're trying to deliver countryside stewardship, we do have to have a balance between what we want to achieve and what we have the resources and funding to achieve. So again, that's part of our working with Ellen and her team to try and take the things that we would like to do, but are constrained by the time or resources in delivering through countryside stewardship, and feeding it into the new schemes. and giving our learning that way. I know that's perhaps not what people want to hear, but it is quite time consuming to try and deliver change through current schemes in a way that it wouldn't be if we were not moving away from what were EU schemes.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so if I might stick with you, Sarah and Ellen, just to ask the question, who should pay for advice? So we've recognised that facilitators and their role that they play is really important, and the groups that have been set up so far have been extremely successful. And we also that advice is very complex. But I just thought it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on who should actually pay for that advice.
I think it's always going to be a bit of a mixed economy. So we know that there's, you know, a lot of kind of specialist advice that rightly needs to be given by the arms length bodies. So whether it's Natural England or Environment Agency for doing quite specific things. But also advice has, you know, an inherent value. And so I think it's more not necessarily about who should pay for advice, but kind of what the value of advice is and how that is reflected in agreements. So, you know, for argument's sake, if the value of an agreement is high, then obviously factoring the cost of advice into that is more achievable. And there are, you know, no shortage of really fantastic commercial advisors out there. But on the other hand, as I said, you know, there's certain types of advice that should stay with DEFRA. So I think it's always going to be a mixed bag. Sorry if that's not a very satisfactory answer.
I think what Facilitation Fund has done has demonstrated to DEFRA that we can pay people to deliver good quality advice that doesn't come from us. And I know that I saw in the questions, there's some questions about one-to-one advice as well as one-to-money. We have to be careful, I think, not to undercut the commercial market. And I know that having talked to some facilitators, they're not comfortable delivering what would be one-to-one commercial advice on a regular basis. They feel that undermines some of the value of what they do as a facilitator. In countryside stewardship, we do pay for advice for catchment sensitive farming, for example, and the annual farm advisory service. And we are looking to see if we can expand what catchment sensitive farming officers can do so that they can offer more of an advisory role to more people. That is something we're looking to do for next year if we have the resources to do so. So I think from the as-is schemes, we do recognise the value of the advice, but there is always that tension with delivering value for the taxpayer and how much we can intervene in a commercial market.
Okay, thanks for that. From the facilitator's perspective then, how do you feel your group members, what are they prepared to pay for, and what advice do they prefer to have via you or for free? If I come to you, Jenny. Oh, we seem to have lost Jenny. She seems to have frozen. Whilst Jenny maybe come back to us, if I'll pass on to Caroline then, if I may. Are you back, Jenny?
Jenny, are you there now?
No, carry on, Caroline.
I think, well, when our group started, as you say, things are changing now, and that one-to-one advice, small amounts of one-to-one advice regarding stewardship options and things is maybe coming into the facilitator's role. I think we have found that because we we're very happy to signpost our members, and that's what happens, is that they go to other specialist advisors for advice on anything other than meadow restoration, really, which we have the knowledge now within the group to share that. So obviously most people would rather get together, often hosting an event on their farm, so that other people, the whole group, can bring their ideas in, and they get that advice that way, if you like, from the whole group. And that's a really good way to share experiences, and the good and the bad. So when people really need help with putting together an application that's going to bring them some income, enable them to do the things they want to on their farm, then generally they're obviously, they're very happy to pay for that. And when they really understand and have maybe learned from somebody else that a specialist can bring some really helpful ideas and help them, challenge them to think about things differently, then I think generally people have done that as well. So members of our group have often approached some of our speakers after a talk and have taken them on to give them one-to-one advice in that way. But that's never part of the plan, if you like. It just happens spontaneously. And we very much link people to create a safe space where people can ask the Environment Agency and other bodies for advice, even when they're in a bit of a pickle as well. And that works very well in that it's an extension of that trusted relationship in order to solve problems in the long term.
Jenny, are you back?
I hope so. Can you hear me okay? Sorry about that. Yes, I think this is a really important area, and something that I found really frustrating for a while to try and articulate well. So I'll try and do that now. I think that if you look at the situation that happens now, that farmers are really happy to pay for an advisor to do a basic payment, because they get a reasonable revenue payment back from their basic payment. What we've been suggesting for a very long time is that we still need that environmental information from farmers as a baseline for natural capital recovery. And what we think that there should be a submission of a natural capital map that goes along with sustainable farm incentive. If that was the case, I'm sure farmers would be happy to pay for an advisor to do a natural capital map submission for them. When it comes on to actually the wider landscape scale facilitation, that what we've found is that what we've used the facilitation, the government funded facilitation funding for, was, as I said earlier, to contextualize the farm within that landscape and to give free advice as to where options might go for that landscape scale delivery, multi-objective delivery. And then when we get to the point that when we've done that and we've had those discussions with all those groups of farmers, then they pay for the advice for their individual agreements, because that, as I think that was said by Sarah, that is where the farmer's happy to pay for the advice they get for actually having the agreement. I think the bit that really stresses me out is the fact that what doesn't seem to be understood is the cost benefit of these facilitators. So if you look at how we can facilitate for free, if funded by the government, co-investment from catchment partnerships, from social capital, that we can lever in. I'm sure the other facilitators will say the same. Water company money, just in case you can't hear me. Chloe was saying sort of water company money, Environment Agency money, facilitating the resource of the other agencies that was just mentioned. There's other NGOs that have got charitable projects, possibly even funded by DEFRA. You actually are the catalyst for this co-investment, and that to actually fund those facilitators from the government central point is actually essential to enable that coordination, because nothing else is coordinating it at the moment, and quite often we're having to go and seek that funding for facilitation from elsewhere, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So to me, it's quite a clear picture. If a farmer's going to get a reward for something we want, which is an environmental baseline, then let's reward them for that. And therefore, I'm sure they won't mind paying for that. Their land needs to be supported by the government, and that cost benefit of co-funding for advice and alignment of delivery and rapid delivery of natural capital recovery, I think that advice should definitely be supported by the government, which, as Brian has alluded to, has demonstrated such benefit and should happen everywhere, really. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Jenny. Some really, really good suggestions there, and I hope that Ellen, Sarah, Brian, you're able to take note of some of those. If I can just sort of think about the facilitation groups themselves now and how they are funded. So there are these long-term agreements that are potentially coming forward in the future. And Chloe referred to this, that 3-year agreements for facilitation groups, it's just not enough. It's not enough time to get these groups even started, really, without doing anything positive on the ground. So what scope is there? And again, this is probably something for the future environmental land management scheme. What potential is there for to have really long-term agreements that might sit alongside kind of landscape or long-term thinking land use change projects? How can we get these facilitation groups? It is about continuity, the continuity of advice, advisor that's needed in areas for that long term. Is there scope to do that? If I come again to you and sorry, Ellen and Sarah, please, for your views on that.
Shall I go first this time, Ellen, just for a change? I think when Facilitation Fund was set up in 2015, and Brian was there at the start, and will correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a novel scheme. It was the first time we tried something like this. So I think the first 2 years, the 5-year funding, recognised that we were doing something new and it was an experiment. I think after the referendum in 2016, there was a strong view that we just didn't have any certainty anymore about the funding, when we would leave the EU, how much budget we would have, what potential we would have to keep offering EU agreements. And at that stage, we didn't have the transition plans in place that we have now, because it was all very immediate. So for the next 3 rounds, we did offer 3-year agreements, I think mainly to manage that uncertainty. Now we're launching the round this year. We're recognising that, yes, we're only offering 3-year agreements again. And I've seen in the Q&A, there's some questions about that, which I'm happy to answer afterwards. But our intention is that if you're in an agreement from 2022, you can move into a domestic collaboration offer when they're available. And we will try and make that seamless for you. So the agreement isn't just going to be 3 years and stop. We're going to try and make it 3 years and then transition into something that comes from the environmental land management offer.
Could I add into that, Sarah, if you finished? Yeah, I think this whole issue of transformation is critical, because sometimes we don't do ourselves enough justice in reflecting back on how far we've travelled from where we started. And I think absolutely, you know, this was a novel scheme. If anything, it was suggested to me at the time that it was just down to me to get on with it and make it work. And the ambition was to set up between 20 and 24 groups in that first year with the budget we had available. But we've gone beyond that and created this movement where we've got 130 plus groups and growing appetite across the sector to do more things collaboratively. And that transformation, as I say, you know, if you blink, you might miss it, but that's been a big transformation in how things have been done. There've been plenty of people trying to do partnership-based approaches around many other things in the past. But I think in terms of land management, this was a sort of real breakthrough point that we've been able to watch sort of develop and flourish. It's certainly, it can be improved and can be built on. So that novel aspect is a great place to start, but unless you apply the learning and tweak as you go forward, you might miss the opportunity to make it even better than what you had to begin with. So there's a real opportunity to build in that sort of feedback to learn as we go, fine tune and tweak if we can. And a large part of the restrictions around what we were able to do, both in terms of budget and scope, was defined by conditions under the Rural Development Plan, and perhaps if we've got the opportunity to reinvent things to our own needs, then that might create opportunities too. But I think, as I say, it is exciting, as I say, to recognise that transformation and to check to see if what we've created can be improved upon and can reach out further. Now, one of the things that I wanted to just sort of land is that at the start, it was envisaged as something around which the limited amount of funding that was given was targeted at the training and advice and not, if you like, buying things into complement machinery rings or whatever it might be. So there's always been a need to reach out beyond the funding and the scope of what you might have had through the funding for the Facilitation Fund. And that, again, is quite exciting, because we're now in a situation where we appear to be getting the attention we deserve, and funding starting to flow in a way that might actually start to match the needs that we have to address. And I think, you know, what was perhaps a linear, straightforward sort of offer to subsidy 5 or 6 years ago has now become more interesting and challenging, also given that the range of issues we have to address are broader, and also the number of funding streams that are coming on stream are becoming quite extensive. So being able to navigate, you know, which one fits best with what you want to do might require some technical help to get the right thing in the right place. So I think, you know, there's a fantastic opportunity to recognise that and to allow the groups to flourish. And if that takes a bit more time to recognise how that journey progresses, then we need to factor that in. So there might be, as I say, there's a clear recognition that development, you know, is required. 3-year agreements might be okay in terms of delivering things that you once you've established, but actually, if you spend the first year, 2 years of your group time just getting to know each other and setting up for what you want to do, then you're limited with the delivery period to make it all happen. So there's something there about this is not just for a funding agreement period, a facilitation fund group, maybe for life, and we need to find a way to nurture, recognise, and you know, establish these groups as something that's got some longer lifespan than a 3-year agreement. Sorry, I had to get that off my chest.
I like that, Brian. Facilitation groups are for life. Yeah, absolutely. It's not just for Christmas. I mean, that some of what you said there is really, really important. And I think there's a lot of groups that are going to come to an end pretty soon. And, you know, what will happen to those groups? I think that's a big concern. Some of them may fold, some of them just may no longer continue, some may be able to continue. But should we be faced with this struggle all the time trying to identify funding streams? It's very difficult. And I come to a question to the facilitators really about, you've all been successful in drawing funding in from alternative sources. How do we need to be set up as facilitation groups to do that? And what opportunities are there, do you think? Should we now start to be thinking about replacing countryside stewardship funding to run our groups with alternative funding? I'll come to Chloe, please, if I can, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I could be offending people in the lowlands here, but I think in terms of bringing in funding to run the groups, to actually run the facilitation groups, I think I definitely, much as I know the farmers do value it, I think expecting them to come up with the kind of money that you'd need to fund events and, you know, the sort of level of activity that we maintain at the moment would be a massive ask. And I honestly don't think that's feasible. Personally, that's just my view. And it's not about them not valuing it. It's just, you know, it would be quite a significant amount of money if you think about the level of funding that facilitation funds give. And also we don't have, you know, I guess if you're in, you know, if you're in lowland areas, you know, you've got potentially, you know, companies out there, allied industry representatives out there that might be willing to put money. We just don't have that, you know, in the uplands. We don't, you know, we're not buying loads of seed, we're not buying loads of chemicals, we're not buying much of anything really. So, you know, that sort of sponsorship money just isn't there, I think it's fair to say. So we're effectively looking at other sources of funding, and we all know, and certainly people from NGOs will be aware, you know, they're all highly competitive now, and actually how many of them are really suitable? You know, they want to fund individual projects, they want to fund capital things that can be seen on the ground. They're not interested in funding a person talking to farmers, as far as I know, unless I'm missing something. So as it stands at the moment, I have to say I'm not desperately optimistic about the other funding sources. And I come back to Jenny's excellent point that she made before about this value for money, about, you know, all the things the groups are delivering. And, you know, I think we do represent excellent value for money, and I hope we can all make a good case for that. There was another part to your question, Anne, but I've forgotten it. I think there was a second bit.
It's just really around how facilitation groups ought to be set up to take advantage of some of the other funding that's out there, because I think that's a real difficult thing for us to be able to do. As you sort of inferred in what you said about the countryside stewardship funding is great because it will fund you as a facilitator to draw in funding to deliver capital projects and provide the advice at the same time. but a lot of the funding currently out there won't necessarily fund you as that critical person that we've all agreed is very, very important to deliver things on the ground. If you've got one last thing to say, Chloe.
Yeah, just very quickly on that. I mean, that's one of the other challenges we've faced because we've not yet made ourselves a formal body. So we're not a charity, we're not a CC, whatever the other ones are, I can't remember. And that's the next step for us. But that is in itself is quite a challenge. And I know, I think if we can get this facilitators network off the ground, that's one of the key things I'm hoping to learn from others, because that's the next big step. Because as an individual facilitator who's also an independent advisor, bankrolling big capital projects is a huge risk. It's very expensive. And it's really quite nerve-wracking. And I've done one, and I'm not in a desperate hurry to do another, if I'm brutally honest.
Does either Caroline or Jenny come in on that point, just very, very quickly?
I'd like to, if that's okay, Caroline, really quickly. I'm just going to say, just making the case I just made also, it is for that co-investment that we've just said. But what the vision is the fact that we'll end up with county-based environmental trusts that can coalesce funding for that blended finance. So what these groups of farmers can do, if they're set up well by the funded facilitation, hopefully from the government, at least in transition, is to create that platform for co-investment, so working on carbon trading, on aligning biodiversity net gain, all this, investment readiness that they want us to do. And that may be that once we're constituted, and maybe we are constituted as CICs or whatever for that, but the idea is to have this template like they have in Oxfordshire of an amalgamation of funding that actually enables, we want 30 advisors out across Gloucestershire that link directly into our local nature partnership that aggregates all our blended finance within a one spatial area, so that we can actually then have funded continuation for groups of farmers as part of the team and partnership delivering that climate action and resilience, including localised food supplies in that. So there is a vision that we have for how this might be long-term funded, but to get there, I think we really do need government support to set these facilitations up and get them embedded for at least the period that you've suggested, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, I'm going to move on if that's all right, unless you've got something very desperate to say, Caroline, on that.
No, I'll leave it. If we're thinking of setting up as a charity so we can support in a specialist way meadow restoration in amongst these other blended finance options that Jenny's saying. So we're going down a different route. I'm happy to discuss that with anybody who's got experience or wants to hear about it. Thank you. Thanks,
Caroline. Okay, so what I really want to move on to now is the facilitation network that Chloe referred to just, and what we can do to sort of build that. And what I want to know is there an appetite out there to have this facilitation network? So it's not just about our individual groups, or we may have multiple groups. It's about connecting up with others and learning from other people within our network. So I'll come to you, Caroline, actually, since you were cut short there. What do you think we need to do to raise the profile of facilitation groups and the facilitation network? What action do you think we need to take to be able to build our network? Just some practical sort of suggestions, if you've got any.
I can't unmute. Here we go. Right, sorry. Practical suggestions. I think keeping in touch with other neighbouring groups, looking for all those common threads between us, having some kind of platform and way where we can share ideas without duplicating existing networks and frameworks, I suppose, because we're all short of time and there's so many wonderful things going on that we need to prioritise all of that. For us, we've talked about sharing regionally, looking at grassland within a mosaic of habitats and doing that at least regionally. On the other hand, we've also got the upland element, and we would really like to be linked in there. So I'm afraid I come back to that overlapping Venn diagram again of needing to network in so many different ways. We don't have the setup that Jenny's been describing in Gloucestershire yet, but to learn from other counties and other areas that are spearheading things would be really great. But so over to everybody else for their ideas.
Jenny, I think you are a great case study, to be honest, and the work that you've been doing in your area. I wonder if you could just explain to us a little bit about how you're partnerships are set up? Is that something that we can think about for the facilitation groups, and how we build our networks? Should we have regional networks? Should we try as a England-wide facilitation network? What's your views on that?
Well, I think it's a really interesting thing, and I know that Ellen's been in touch with our local nature partnership project officer, Matt, we've got a really interesting situation in Gloucestershire, because we have alignment between our county boundary, our local nature partnership, and our local enterprise partnership, which I know doesn't happen everywhere. But now the aspiration is to actually, as I say, have the set up some county environmental trust like they have in Oxfordshire, so we have one place to put money to deliver lots of stuff. We also think working at a county level works really well, because we know that the national support for agriculture is challenged by world trade rules and income forgone, whereas at a county level, we can invest any amount of money we like as a partnerships into farmland, infrastructure, and all the things that we want to do, including realising new markets like dynamic procurement of food supplies and all the other things that could drive a business case for regenerative agriculture. So we can see a really, really strong way forward as to how that goes. So the way that we're working is that we're looking at, could we create these groups, really small localized groups, to build resilience for communities for flooding, for food access, and because of climate change disruption, potentially all the things that are highlighted as risks in the report that I put in the chat. Can we enable our county to become investable from an international carbon market? That's what we're looking at. You know, we created a natural capital baseline for what might be a 30 or 50-year project for natural capital recovery. How can we feed the data in annually from our farmers and communities to actually build that case for what needs to be invested in, and how we can quantify to the investors that that's been delivered for water quality, biodiversity recovery, carbon capture, all the things that we want to do. So from my perspective, it's a geospatial network that we need, as well as a national network. So we're actually connecting to all the things that are out there, which is all landscape partnerships, catchment partnerships, but around a county structure, which then enables our districts to act on climate emergencies, our communities to act on climate emergencies, our farmers to be part of that partnership. So to me, I find it really challenging at the moment, because the government keeps lobbing out vast chunks of money for different joined up projects to deliver lots of capital projects, to sort of have some disparate way that all of us are trying to work out how that fits within this longer structured strategic vision of how we need to act urgently and act now. So from our perspective, we want to be able to create localized groups of farmers supported by facilitators that can all talk to each other, that can then talk to neighbouring counties facilitators, that we can share how we're collecting data. There's so much variation in carbon capture data, for example. There's so much stuff we collaborate on. But I think we all need to actually look after the piece of the world that we care about and get that climate ready, and get ourselves and our communities climate ready. And I think that we can share how we're going to do that across extensive networks. And we just need to keep talking to each other. And I can see these facilitators being the absolute conduit, not only for alignment, information transfer, helping policies to become reality, and reality to feed up barriers back to policy, alignment of all that funding, but also just to be with that whole network of specialist advisors, be the facilitator to that advice, as you said earlier, to bring all that together into that space. But I think we need a lot of us, and we need them soon. And we can see how all this could feed into actually the global picture, because we can plug up all this, you know, water body, parish and county data up into the United Nations ecosystem assessment for the planet, and we can play our part in our locality and actually make that part of the bigger global picture, which is a reality that's happening with Ares Facilitator and the United Nations. So, you know, this is really, really, really important stuff we could do here. And the role of facilitators is absolutely crucial in this, because without that, you don't get the join up. You don't get the data, you don't get the join up. And you actually end up with a situation where you've got lots of frenetic things happening, all good things, as Caroline says, but there's no cohesion. And we need cohesion, and we need to work together, and we need to do it now.
Absolutely fantastic, Jenny. Brilliant. Your vision is amazing. Which brings me to the vision of DEFRA, and what scope is there? Brian, Ellen, Sarah, funding a facilitation network. Is there any money around to help us continue and develop a network? What vision do you have for facilitation groups, for a facilitation network?
I'll leave it for Sarah and Ellen to offer any funding that might be available. I don't have any, I'm afraid, just now, but happy to chip in. I want to come in this after they've perhaps answered that question.
Sarah, do you want to come in first?
Only to say, and this isn't official, but we are looking to do another round next year with more money. But as yet, the bid for that money has just gone into the overall spending review bid, and we haven't had anything back from Treasury. But broadly, you can take the direction of travel is that DEFRA have an ambition to keep putting more money in and look at ways we can make changes. I can't say that we would fund a network, and to be honest, it's not something that Brian and I and Ellen have discussed, but it's certainly an idea we could look at and take away.
Yeah, I think not much to add from what Sarah said there. We can certainly reflect that back in the conversations that we're having. I'm sure everyone's aware. Well, you might not be. Spending reviews aren't the most scintillating topic in the news, I must say, but it is something that's ongoing in government at the moment. So we can certainly kind of take that away. But also, I think we kind of stay abreast of and aware of many of the kind of the informal networks that you have as well, which obviously, not being associated with government are able to be, flexible and fleet of foot. So it's always interesting to come to events like this and to see what you're setting up amongst yourselves, because it's, we just really recognise all the fantastic work that you're all doing through the networks that you have.
Can I come in briefly? One of the things that's really important just to log is that we've created this sort of initiative that is generating sort of great amounts of interest and appeal, and sort of throwing up opportunities to be addressed that perhaps we might not have covered as well as we could. But behind that, there's other things as well. One of the things I recognise and sort of been quite keen to sort of look into is just a number of sort of regional and sort of more local networks that might be either helpful, like the Yorkshire and Cumbria Farmers Network, or as Jenny was saying, with the flag work in Gloucester and the southwest, provide some vehicle. And I think to put the question back is that have you explored from the local level where those sort of wider networks that might exist at the local level might be able to help you? So that'd be one thing. The other thing that I'm really keen to just get across is that there's layers of sort of engagement that we need to be savvy to as well. And so I think for government and government bodies, then it may be that there's some things that we can do, but perhaps there's things that we don't want to do that could be done by other people perhaps more effectively too. And one of the simple things that I was in despair about was when we lost Huddle through the through the end of that contract with government. We lost the opportunity to have a very simple platform for facilitators and members of groups to collaborate. So there could be some quite simple digital approaches to providing basic contact details and enabling contact to be made between groups to make their own wave moves from there. So there might be solutions beyond investing large amounts of money or providing funding to do these things, rather than perhaps having something simple that actually provides the bare ingredients to allow that network to flourish. So I'm keen to look into that too, to see if there are anything simple mechanisms that exist that we could perhaps deploy, just so that people can find out who the neighbour is that's got a group and how they can get in touch to say hello.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. I'm just very aware we've only got a few minutes left. Could you be extremely brief, please? I would like to get your sort of concluding remarks about facilitation groups. Just a sentence of what your views are on facilitation groups, please. Caroline, you're at the top, so I'll start with you, please. You're on mute.
Yep, everything we can do to keep our group going. So the message: facilitation groups for life. Keep linked in to all your local partners and keep going in any way you can. And for our group, I think it's been a wonderful source of funding. I agree with Brian. We couldn't have imagined at the beginning where we'd be today after 5 years of support, and we love it. Thank you very much.
Chloe?
Yeah, I think for me, everything Caroline said, but also, you know, from the farmer's perspective, I think and I hope that it's the way that they are going to get the help and the support they need to cope with what are going to be a fairly bumpy 5 years ahead. I think that's my big worry, and you know, that absolutely has to be my focus as a facilitator, to help them through that scheme, to help them through that period, but also to maximise the environmental delivery we can get. Because personally, I think the Hope Valley and the Bradfield areas and much of the Peak District, it's such a special place. You know, it's got to be around better than and bigger than in, you know, 10 years' time for everybody's benefit.
Jenny? Final remarks, please.
Thank you. Yes, thank you ever so much. We haven't answered the Q&A somebody's put in the chat, so perhaps we ought to, they were going to do that after the event or something. But no, I was just going to say that, you know, I sort of called together very kindly with support across the industry, you know, this discussion around a network of farm advice, because there's so many different organisations that are actually looking at farm advice. So I have put in the chat a webinar that we're going to try and pull all this together. We've had support from over 35 organisations that are listed in there, and I see the facilitation fund and the facilitation fund and the facilitators being absolutely a crucial linchpin in that, as I've sort of outlined earlier how I see that as being really important. But please do join that conversation, because we feel that there needs to be structure and support, as I agree with Chloe. Bumpy ride ahead. Lots of people, lots of farmers want to change. They don't know how. And you know, if anybody wants to see how difficult this is, come and see some of the farmers who are really, really struggling as to how to do this transition. So yeah, I think that the groups, yeah, for life, I think is, and I think they need us as much as anything, and we can facilitate a lot of good stuff, a lot of investment, and create a lot of action on the ground if we keep going. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. And again, very, very, very brief, please, Ellen, your sort of summary thoughts on facilitation groups.
We love the work that you're doing. We're really excited to keep learning from you. So please, please keep it up, and we really look forward to engaging with you going forward.
Sarah, I'll come to you next. I'll just skip my view.
My reflections after these meetings, as I was on the facilitators, I'm always impressed by how passionate and positive and engaged facilitators are. And I think your engagement with senior people in DEFRA is reflected in the budget and the policy ambitions that are being shown. So keep doing it, because we want to keep delivering this for you.
And finally, Brian, very quickly, please.
Thank you. Yeah, well, in 2015, we put the train on the tracks, and the years since then, we've started the journey. But let's hope we can continue that journey and reach the destination that we want, which is restored nature and sort of response to the climate emergency in a way that we have survival. So yeah, we need to keep up the good work. The last point I'd like to make is just to thank Anne and Liz for their energy and time and making this happen. So thank you very much for sorting this and getting it in place.
No problem. I'm really sorry that we've not managed to get to the questions that people have been asking. We will try and answer some of those afterwards. Hopefully we've sort of spoken around some of those subjects that people have been asking about. There's just so much to talk about. We've run out of time, unfortunately. I mean, I've got a lot of thank yous to give as well. I need to thank you guys for being part of this series, all of the speakers that we've had throughout the last 7 webinars, and you as panelists today, because I understand it's quite pressurized having these questions put to you, but I really, really appreciate it. And I think everybody that's joined these webinars has got a lot from them. I need to thank my group, White Peak Farmers, because it was their initial idea that we put this these webinars together. You know, they were really keen to connect up with other facilitation groups and learn from others. So a massive thank you to my group. I've obviously got to thank our funders, the Southwest Peak Landscape Partnership and the National Heritage Lottery Fund. I need to thank Liz, because she's been brilliant behind the scenes doing all the technical stuff and keeping me on track. Huge thanks to Brian, because again, he's been a massive support throughout the whole of the Facilitation Fund right from the very beginning in 2015. He believed in our White Peak Farmer group, a bit like yours, Caroline, a bit of an odd one, didn't quite fit the criteria, but he squeezed us in, and I'm very, very grateful that he did, because there's a lot of good stuff that's come from it. But also because Brian is just relentless and he keeps going, he's fantastic. And I think we all should be thanking him for what he's done. For the facilitation groups, but also for these webinars. He's been a great support to me, so thank you, Brian. I want to thank everybody that's attended the events and the webinars, that you've posed your questions, your comments, because it is about conversation, it is about getting people together. Nobody's got the answers, nobody's got the solutions, but by coming together, hopefully we can sort of solve our problems as a society. So I just want to thank everybody, and it's all been fantastic. We will be posting this recording on our White Peak Farmers YouTube channel. We'll send out details of that afterwards. I need to give out a shout to Gemma Batten, who's organising a farmer group forum on the 16th of November at Honeydale Farm in the Cotswolds. So if anybody's available, I would suggest that you go along to that. Again, it's more discussions about facilitation groups, landscape recovery, you name it, they'll be covering very similar things to what we have done. And I think the more of that happens, the better. But yes, just thank you very much, everybody. And yeah, we'll hope we can continue these conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, 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 everybody.
Bye.